Manage Database has two other tabs we briefly mentioned, but we want to cover them more extensively now. That would be the Tables and Relationships section. But before we do that, I want to hit the Cancel button here. Now, we talked about in the last section about how we can get out of the issue where we deleted the address to field. Remember, it's gone here. In fact, if you remember, we also go ahead and created this timestamp mod 1 field. So how do we get that back, even though it's at this point really permanently deleted? Well, we have one more fail-safe method to get it back. If you hit cancel here and then hit discard, all the changes since we last opened up Managed Database will be gone. So last time we opened it up was we went into layout mode, we added all the fields to layout. So you should have been out of Managed Database already. If you come back in, that's starting a new session. So it's going to discard all of the things you did from that session if we click that. If you just hit cancel, you're back to this dialog. But we're going to hit cancel here, hit discard, then go to the file menu and choose Manage Database. And you'll notice that everything's back to the way it was. We now have address 2 back and timestamp mod 1 is gone. And in fact, a lot of things are back to the way they were. Creation order is now set, not field name. We'll change that. And now we're ready to go ahead and talk about these other tabs. Now, they're not as important right now because we're not really using additional tables and we're not really creating relationships right now. But I want to give you an idea of what these areas are about so you can be prepared for them when we get to them in the intermediate section. So we'll go over to the table section. And what you want to know is how to create a new table. Well, it's real simple. Just type in new table or whatever you want to name that table and hit the create button. It's much like creating a field. And if you want to change it, well, you go ahead and type the changes and hit the change button and it changes it. And you'll see that it lists up here the different tables, the source. Now the source is going to be FileMaker all during these tutorials, but your source could be an external source like ESS using ODBC. But we're not going to cover those in this tutorial, so all of your sources are going to be from FileMaker, but it could change. Then you have your details. Well, we have 15 fields in contacts and 1 record, 0 fields in new table 2 and 0 records. And then we have occurrences and graph. This refers to the relationships tab. And we're going to cover those in a second, but if you have more than one occurrence of this table in the relationship graph, we'll list them. As many as it can fit on here, and it'll put a comma, and you can, and list as many as it can across the screen. If you have a large screen, you can obviously see more. So that's very important to understand how relationships work, but I'm just planting the seed right now. Don't worry if you don't understand what an occurrence is and what a relationship can be used for. We're just planting seeds and giving you like a little bit of detail here so you can get prepared for when we do cover this. It's not the most important thing right now. Let's cover more about how this dialog works. Notice that you can come over here and click on table name and sort it, and notice that these really do nothing up here. They're just headers, so they don't really sort. But you can view by table name in creation order, table name alphabetically, or custom order if you rename, you rearrange them. So it's a lot like how things work in managed field section. So you can really apply the same ideas here. So there's a couple other things here. You do have the print button. Again, it works the same way as your print button in the field section. Whatever is highlighted prints, so make sure you remember that. And another nice little trick, because you want to get very efficient with this dialog because you'll be here for a long time. You'll be using it quite a bit. You want to get efficient with it, and one of the quick ways to get to the field section is double click. If we come over here and double click on contacts, we're now in the field section. We can switch up here to new table, or we can come back here and double click on new table and come in here. But it all depends on how you want to get there. It may be faster if you're here to switch there, or if you're over here to go into this section this way. So you want to become familiar with all the little ins and outs here that you can. So let's go into the relationships section and cover that a little bit. Now in the relationships section, you're going to see that you have contacts and new table 2. Well, they appear to be your table. They're not really, they're actually table occurrences. And you can kind of identify that if you hover over this little arrow here. It'll say your source table is contacts and your source table is new table 2. They just happen to have the same name, but they're more like aliases or shortcuts if you're familiar with those in your system software. The shortcuts or aliases, or as we call them in FileMaker, the occurrences or table occurrences, are really defined by the relationships between the tables, which we are not covering right now. But you can draw relationship lines between these. And so you can have more than one relationship between a table, so therefore you need occurrences of that table to find all these different relationships. But again, don't worry about it if you don't understand how this works completely, because we're just planting the seed. It's going to take a while to build up to this and understand that, and so when we get into the intermediate tutorial, that's when we'll start covering relationships. Just remember, these are not tables, these are table occurrences. They represent that table, and the purpose is so you can create relationships. Now you can delete these table occurrences, and they have no effect on the actual table. But if we go over to the table section and we try to delete it here, it'll ask you, do you also want to remove the table occurrences? Well, let's not check that option and hit delete. And we'll see here that we now have a table occurrence over here with the table missing. It relies on that. So we'd actually have to click on it and hit the delete key to get rid of it. So if we actually come over here and say new table 3 and create it, notice we have it over here in the relationship. Come back here and this time delete it like we did the very first time we did, back when we were briefly going over this. This time we're going to check that option, and you'll see that now it's gone. So you very often, most likely, want to check that, delete the occurrences out of there. There are certain exceptions to that, and we're really not going to find out right now because you have to understand how a relationship works. But that's the basic idea. You want to understand how all this stuff works. So we've got tables, fields, and relationships. What you really want to understand is the field section at this point. If you understand that, you're doing perfectly fine. If you understand a little bit about how tables work, and maybe even a little bit less about how relationships work, well, don't worry about that. It's not that important. But remember how to interact with it a little bit. That's what you want to get out of this tutorial right here.